It's social engineering. That's right. And if you want to play ball as a corporation, you have to do it. And so this is costs for the company. They have to do all this crap. They have to hire people they don't want to hire. It's all just a big mess. Who cares what you look like? Who cares where you came from unless it's got something relevant to the story?
Identity politics will be the end of us.
Identity politics will destroy anything that it gets involved in.
Are we paying these people to front up, or are we paying them to fly to Wellington to eat their lunch? Should you really lose your career for refusing to take part in a 90-minute lesson about Māori culture? This government doesn't actually have any idea how to get economic growth. Show us what you made of, Prime Minister.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan, Garner.
Okay, Dr. James Lindsay, Mr. Anti-Woke, the man who wants to end this Marxist lurch towards gender and queer identity policies and politics and identity politics. He's over it. It'll ruin us, so we must destroy it first, he says. He's an in-demand international speaker on the world stage. He says this whole approach is a fraud and it's communism and a way of breaking down the world as we know it today and to destroy life as we know it. And his best line comes at the end of this mammoth interview. He calls Jacinda Ardern a monster for her part in all of this.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan, Garner.
James, welcome to the podcast. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's fun to be here.
What is it? So I obviously I know what you do, and that's why you're here. But to New Zealanders, what are you?
That's a fantastic question. As we were talking a little bit before, and I said it's a hard question. You think you should know what you do, right? I research totalitarian ideologies is what I do, and I try to tell people about them. That's the best job description I have. What that turns into in practice is that I write. So I write articles. I've also written books on these subjects particularly. I've published 4 books, or 5, depending on how you want to count them. And then I make podcasts. I've got, I don't know, close to 500 or 600 hours of podcasts. They range about totalitarian ideologies. A lot of it's been about Marxism and communism. I had one come out today where I read the second chapter of Hitler's Mein Kampf and explained what the Nazis were up to. So I study totalitarian ideology and I put that information out so that I wanted people to be able to hear it, legitimately. What are the bad guys, so to speak, saying? Well, they are the bad guys. What are the bad guys saying? And what did they mean by what they said? So I spend my time reading this stuff, understanding this stuff, and communicating it.
And so you're putting it in this modern day or this postmodern context of how we live our lives now, and the atmosphere and the environment that we live in. To give it a context, so you have written about the queering of students. You've written about critical race theory and that sort of thing, and wokeism basically. What is, and you stand against wokeism.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is woke? Where'd that word come from?
So that's 2 questions that are very different. So what is woke? I'll start and we'll kind of come back to that. But just to put it on the table, my thesis is that communism as an ideology has evolved over time. It didn't start with Karl Marx, but we can use Karl Marx as a benchmark. And it has evolved since the 1840s when he wrote the Communist Manifesto. It took on a different form when the Soviets took power in 1917 in Russia. It took on a different form when Mao Zedong took power in China. And it took on a different form in what's called Western Marxism through the critical theory and through the cultural Marxist schools of thought. And it's the derivative of that. So it's
Marxist.
It's Marxism made to attack Western societies using identity politics.
So it's made to weaken the current society, break it down, and to replace it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what the Marxist program is. I don't think it necessarily calls for a violent revolution the way that Karl Marx did. It seems to have adopted more of what's called the Fabian model, which is an infiltration, the long march through the institutions, so to speak.
So who's introducing it? Because if you look at it, we'll look at it at different levels that it's introduced, and I certainly believe it's here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've picked up on it here, but you well and truly would have understood Jacinda Ardern and so forth. Who's pushing it? I mean, who are these so-called sponsors? Where are they? Who are they?
Well, there's a lot of them. So this makes it. I wish I could give you just a succinct answer and say it's the United Nations, because it partly is. No, it definitely partly is. Or that it's the World Economic Forum, or that it's BlackRock and Vanguard and these gigantic financial institutes, which it is. Or it's foreign. So it's the deliberate propaganda of a foreign government like the CCP, because it is. But it also comes kind of in this homegrown sense. It comes out of our universities primarily. In fact, what is woke, it developed primarily in our education schools, at least in North America, and has kind of disseminated from there to the rest of the world. but it's Marxism that get repackaged into literally a theory of education and a theory of therefore of thinking and knowing. They got disseminated, I think, kind of organically. 40 years of the universities going further and further left.
I agree. This is the critical thought in universities that's now spreading itself around society. People say to me, the reason why we're in the situation we are today is because we've had 40 years of education, of a particular style of education.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I don't think it actually, like, if you think of it like a plane trying to take off on the runway, I don't think it actually got off the ground until 2011 with the Occupy Wall Street movement. Because then all these big banks, Goldman Sachs, very famously, Vivek Ramaswamy wrote his book, Woke Inc., and explained about how Goldman Sachs went woke in order to deflect all the criticism that they were getting for their financial misdeeds, right? No, we're progressives. We,
You see it with all companies now.
With all the companies. But that's the ESG program. That's how that works. Your ESG scoring determines your access to financial capital from these big lending entities, and that's all tied up with – these are all these huge passive investments.
False. It's fake.
It's very fake. But where did ESG come from? Actually, ESG was created at the United Nations by a guy named James Gifford in 2003. James Gifford's idea was, well, we have all this money in passive investing, like index funds, mutual funds, and so on. We have all this money that people have invested literally as their retirements, and it's just sitting there. Well, there's a thing in investment called impact investing. So let's say you wanted to save the forests, right? So you go and you invest in companies that are dedicated, whether they give money, they do projects, or they make products, or whatever it is, to saving the forests. So you choose to invest in companies based on whether or not they're saving the forest. Because I bring up the forest because that's what James Gifford was interested in. And so that's called impact investing. He said, well, we have trillions of dollars of people's retirement funds that are in these passive investment programs, mutual funds primarily, that cannot be directed toward impact investing because it's passive investment. The actual individual isn't picking and choosing. What if we could find a program by which we could index investment portfolios such that they achieve the goals that we might want with environmental, social, and corporate governance modeling to predict long-term success for the company and to get involved in environmental and social issues and do impact investing with that reservoir of $6 to $10 trillion that is the world's retirement funds. And so they cook up this scheme. What they're going to do is they're going to score different companies with an ESG number, and that's going to determine where they go, whether or not they get listed in these indices as being a company that's likely to be on the right side of history.
Is this where ethical investing came from as well?
This is where, impact investing already existed, but this is where the idea of this is not where index funds came from. But the creator of the index fund said that this is where it would go if we went in that direction, and to be very careful with it. And I'm not sure when Larry Fink at BlackRock got involved, but they, of course, are the biggest coordinator of all of this.
Companies, these companies are not just the financial market companies. I'm talking about all the corporates. So I've certainly seen it here. They're green, they're pro-rainbow, they're diversity, which usually means they're not diverse. Usually means the opposite. They're not inclusive, but they say inclusive. It usually means the opposite. Companies here in this country are don't want to be embarrassed publicly, don't want to be called out for having all these assets but not doing the right thing by the minority. So they're bending over backwards. This is what you're talking about?
That's exactly it. So, for example, there's an entity, I don't know how influential it is, excuse me, here in New Zealand, but it's called the Human Rights Campaign. It's the blue field with the yellow equal sign. A lot of people have seen the symbol. So it's extremely influential in the United States. So it's a nonprofit, right? Interested in the LGBTQ or the rainbow or whatever we want to call it. They started out as a gay rights organization in the 80s or 90s certainly. So what? Well, eventually they have become the publishers of a index. They've got, in fact, a series of indices that are relevant, at least in the United States, and I don't know how it goes beyond that. But one is called the Corporate Equality Index, so that could certainly be global. One is called the Healthcare Equality Index, that could be global. One is called the Municipal Equality Index, so they're looking at city government. That could also be global. And then the fourth one that they have is called the State Equality Index, and I think that only applies to the 50 U.S. states, but I'm not positive. And what they're doing is saying, okay, do you have non-discrimination policies in place for LGBTQ? Do you have this? Do you have that? And they have this whole kind of, non-discrimination policies, and you say, all right, I'm fine with that. Then you go to the next line. They have 3 different categories for your score. You go, or 4 actually. You go to the next line and it says, what are you doing to actively promote this? So marketing campaigns and so on are required if you want to get your top score. And then there's a section that's talking about a third section that's talking about what are you doing? Let's see, it's corporate policy. What are you doing to actively promote? And then I'm trying to think of what the third section is about, but it's something to the same effect. It's lobbying, government lobbying. How are you getting involved in telling so you're Coca-Cola or some company, what are you doing to do lobbying on behalf of LGBTQ issues? And if you want to get your score. And so then the fourth category is actually demerits. What have you done that's wrong, and we'll take your points away? Well, if you don't have a perfect corporate equality index score, 100, there's all these consequences that you get. For number one, this is less important at the university career fairs in most universities, they won't even let you there. The job counselors at the universities who are trying to connect the students that are coming to graduate with possible interviews won't recommend anything short of a 100 corporate equality index score. But that corporate equality index score is also a proxy for your S and your ESG, social scoring. So your access to short-term and long-term capital, short-term in particular being relevant for most corporations, is determined based on whether or not you have a good CEI score, corporate equality index. And then, again, they have one for healthcare, they have one for cities. And so this gives them a gigantic lever, right? And this is just a nonprofit, the Human Rights Campaign. And the reason it's got so much power, and corporations bend over backwards to have this perfect score, is because it becomes a proxy for their access to other things like the fruits of university students.
Just to be a good citizen, just to be seen as a good corporate citizen.
Not
to be called out.
Not to be called out. To be seen as and to be not called out. I don't think that corporations are typically as concerned with being seen as good unless there's some financial incentive for
negative implication.
Yeah, right. Like they're going to get, like you said, called out or cancel mob thrown at them, and sometimes it backfires. It's not. To my knowledge, they didn't do the homework to prove it, but I think that Dylan Mulvaney's face ended up on the Bud Light beer can very famously because it was part of their CEI score agreement. Another example of that.
And this is a bad thing? This is bad because of what adds cost? It
adds cost. Obviously,
it's false.
It's
social engineering.
It's social engineering. That's right. And if you want to play ball as a corporation, you have to do it. And so this is costs for the company. They have to do all this crap. They have to hire people they don't want to hire. It's all just a big mess. And if you don't do it, then they can shut you down, again, financially by shutting off your access to short-term capital.
But it gets you nowhere, really. If you think about it, it's just another department within the company.
That's right.
So they become police officers.
Commissars. Commissars is a better word. That's right. They are political officers there to make sure that you're conforming. And if you don't conform and you don't do it right, then they can bring. It's a protection racket, is what it boils down to. An old school, whoever runs, whatever the mob boss runs the neighborhood, and Jimmy the Gun.
Mafia.
Yeah, Jimmy the Gun comes by and says it'd be awful if something didn't happen.
Well, and you can actually get the sort of feminazis and the sort of thugs in there.
Yeah, of course. The whole program favors the ideological, the bully, and I want to be careful with how I say this. It's a particular style of mentally ill, the personality disordered, the types of people who will create conflict in order to advance themselves. Yeah. Because the whole thing's set up as a grift. You just pretend that you're in line with the ideological take about a certain identity. Notice it's not about identity.
How do we fight this? How do we ordinary citizens, after listening to you and hearing this, because we know it exists, we see it all the time. Yeah. How do we react to it?
We've got to put in we have names for it, but we've got to expose what it is. And the best way to do that is to point out the blatant contradictions to people. How come if it's about inclusion, it operates through exclusion? That is an easy contradiction. Easy. Why is it that, so I don't know a single example in the New Zealand context, but I could give you a dozen in the American context. I'm sure that you have one, so you can fill in the name or so your listeners can. Why is it that you have some black man or a Maori or whatever who doesn't agree with the politics, the woke politics, who's come out and spoken up against it, and somebody said, well, he's not a real representative of that?
We get a lot of that here. Yeah, you're not a real Maori.
That's right, because
you're only a real Maori if you're an activist.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so that is a contradiction for people. Yes. Right? So we actually had a congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, who's an outright communist in my opinion. And Ayanna Pressley said, we don't want any more black faces who don't want to be black voices, and we don't want any more brown faces who don't want to be brown voices. So that means there's to use very American but punchy and colorful language, there is a plantation. And if you aren't on the plantation, then you don't count.
This is happening here. Shane Jones, he's a senior cabinet minister in the government here. He's Māori, but he's also Dalmatian, and he has Anglo-Saxon blood as well. And he's standing up and calling out the racism that's going back from the Māori Party, who are effectively saying, "Hey, you white guys don't count." So he's turning up and saying this division is not going to work. Now he's credible. I think hugely credible because he's Māori and saying it back to their face.
Yeah.
That's silencing them.
Yeah, well, sadly, that's what it takes, because when people are thinking in terms of identity category, you can't, the truth has a very hard time penetrating that. Yeah. And that's the curse of woke, right? It's no longer, what we want is, let's be real, most people have ideas, and most of their ideas are not great. Some of their ideas are good, right? And that's the nature, right? So you say, hey, I'm going to go blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go down here and do this. And I'm like, dude, that's kind of stupid. And you're like, oh, crap, that is kind of stupid. Thank you, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's what we want. But when you have a thinking and identity category, the truth can't break through. You want as many people being able to say the truth for the truth, whatever it is, as possible.
That's the way to fight back against it, because it's a narrative that won't be broken.
I'm telling you, you've got to point out the contradictions. You've got to point out that, that guy's Maori until he disagrees. And now he's not anymore.
No, now he's not. Well, we've had that situation.
Well, we had the Larry Elders, a black guy from East L.A., which is like, as they say, ghetto as you can get, really. His name's, Larry Elder. He ran for governor of California, but he's a Republican. He's a conservative. And the Los Angeles Times put a headline that said he's the black face of white supremacy. Stuff like that, by the way, wakes up the citizens that this is fake. This isn't about whether it's a black person or a white person or a Maori or what. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with, do you toe the line or do you not? Which means it's a fake. It's a fraud.
So there's a narrative here that has been. We have in our government departments. There are effectively auditors, Māori auditors, who are placed in there at reasonably high pay to make sure that there's an unofficial quota system. Are Māori getting the good jobs? Are Māori represented properly in the company?
Sure.
Is there a Māori strategy running through? Now, see, I think that's going to divide and break us.
It will. I mean, this program was run under the brand naming affirmative action in the United States. And Trump has just now struck down the original executive order granting it from 1965. It was in direct opposition to the civil rights law Americans thought they passed the year before in 64. And it caused a ton of strife. And it causes a ton of,
resentment.
Resentment, but other problems. So now when you have a policy like that, every single time you run into a Maori that's in any of these positions, you have to wonder, did they earn it? Are they good at it? Or do they get stuck there?
Is it merit-based?
That's right.
Yeah.
And then you get the resentment in the other populations, any other population, because you say, well, they have an easier ride in. I can't get a good job. I think I could do that job better than they can, and they're not including me for an arbitrary reason. So let's be real. Being Maori or not is not arbitrary, but excluding somebody in a can you do the job situation because of their background or race is arbitrary.
We have a teacher union here called the PPTA, the Post Primary Teachers Association. They are the most militant of the groups. I've done some coverage with them, and they have a manifesto last year that one would do everything based on the Treaty of Waitangi, which is the Constitution of New Zealand. Yeah. But secondly, they wanted to bring in a queer counsellor for every school. And because of the rise of the LGBT issue in our schools, which I think they overstated, and secondly, the queer counsellors, as they'd been known, had to be gay themselves. So you would, because they said that the normal counsellors were not fit for purpose, which is an insult to them. How on earth do you fight that?
It's the
just
same
madness.
Playbook. It's the same playbook. First of all, though, what I found, and I wrote a book about this, so I know a little bit about it.
You do.
There's queer does not mean what people think it means. People think, oh, it's just another identity. You got lesbians, you got gay. Okay, so what's a lesbian? It's a woman who's attracted to women. I understand that. That's not hard. What's a gay? It's a guy who's attracted to guys. I understand that. I can get my head around. What's bisexual? It's somebody who's attracted to. Okay, that makes sense. What's trans? Well, okay, I kind of get it. Whatever. But then you get to the Q, LGBTQ, right? Queer. What's queer? Well, there's a book that defines queer. Queer theory is a school of thought that arose in the late 1980s and early 1990s. It came out of sex-positive radical feminism, where it met sexuality studies. It had progenitors like Gail Rubin, who wrote a paper in 1984 called Thinking Sex that lays out a new radical politics of sex and sexuality. Judith Butler, most famously. So it has this history. And then there's a guy named David Halperin, and he wrote a book called Saint Foucault, referring to the French postmodernist Michel Foucault. Saint Foucault, he wrote this in 1995, and on page 62, I've had to cite it a few times, he defines queer. And he says the first three words in his definition of queer are unlike gay identity.
So what is queer? Queer is almost
queer is a political stance. He says it is a political stance. It takes its meaning. He said it can refer to anything, and there's nothing in particular to which it necessarily refers.
So it's more than gay.
It's different to gay. You could be queer being gay, or you could be queer being straight. It doesn't matter. Queer, he says.
That's a philosophy.
It's a philosophy. That's right. He says that queer is defined in its opposition to the normal, the legitimate, and the dominant.
It's about taking down marriage.
He says that it can refer to anybody who is or feels, which is subjective, marginalized because of their sexual practices. So anybody who wants to say I'm marginalized because, I like to do something weird in the shower with myself or whatever, and I feel marginalized that I can't talk about it in public, that person qualifies as queer.
This is made up.
It's made up.
This is bullshit.
There is no such thing as a queer identity. It is a political stance. It is a political stance. And so when they say that person has to be gay, first of all, they've just opened themselves up to the next turn of attack, because somebody's going to come along and say, well, I'm not gay, but I'm polyamorous, and you have to let me in, and then there's going to be a big fight. Yeah. I'm telling you.
I identify as a tiger. You have to let me in.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Whatever. There's no limits. And that's really the idea behind queer.
Yeah, queer is open to anything.
That's right. Anything that's a limiting principle, anything where you would be told no, they're against that. That's what queer actually means. It's a political stance of being opposed to normalcy and legitimacy by definition.
Right. It's also set up to get funding.
Of course. These things are all grifts. I call that the iron law of woke corruption.
Yeah. Anywhere
you see woke anything happening, right? This is iron law. I'm telling you. You go digging, you get a good journalist who has the bravery to do it.
There.
What you're going to find is they're going to say, well, this school system, this company, this whatever has a problem with XYZ, Maori, with LGBTQ, whatever. There's a problem there. There's discrimination. There's some issue. The culture's wrong. And we have a program to sell you $3 million state contract in order to solve it, and this is the only program you can use, or else you're a racist.
This is why the union wanted the queer counsellors, because the queer counsellors would be on their watch, and they would be appointing them effectively.
Yeah, so
be their friends.
So it's right, and this is the grift of inclusion. Do you know where this comes from?
Where does it come from?
It comes from the Soviet Union. This comes from
communism.
Joseph Stalin in 1913 wrote a book called Marxism and the National Question, and it's a short book. Yeah. It's taken as the origin of this line of thinking. So Stalin, it's called the National Question. He wanted to think about, what about these nations, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, etc., that were going to be in the Soviet Federation, right? What about these other nations and their nationalities? They think of themselves as a people. The Ukrainians are a people, right? And so what about them? How do we deal with them? And he lays out this program that in the next 10 years becomes known as korenization in Russian. What that means is putting down roots. And what he did was he went to all these different, we'll say Ukraine or whatever, Estonia, the Tatars, whoever, and he went to these different groups and he said, the Soviets, unlike the Russians are your enemy, and what we believe in is self-determination. And you guys should be able to speak your own language. You should have schools in your own languages. You should have everything separate, and it's just as valid. And you guys should be able to self-determine. Ukrainians should self-determine Ukrainian issues. And then, by the way, you're under this attack by the Russians, the Great Russian, and the Great Russian is a chauvinist. It was literally called Great Russian Chauvinism in the Soviet literature. And what we have to do is resist that. So the people in Ukraine who would resist Great Russian Chauvinism and who would adopt the socialist line were then promoted through the ranks, and they were made into, you said you got to have all these queer counselors. They were made into the commissars and the counselors.
Yep.
And if anybody criticized them, that's Great Russian Chauvinism. That's a form of bigotry. You're trying to force these Ukrainians or whatever to be Russian when they're not Russian. And so what you ended up doing was building an army of bureaucrats in the Soviet Union under the korenization program who could not be criticized because it was bigotry to criticize them.
This is what we have here?
It's the same program.
This is exactly the same program.
It is the exact same program. We have imported it to the 21st century
it's infiltrated
under the name DEI. And listen, seriously, so Korenica works exactly like what we call inclusion. Inside the Korenica program in the Soviet Union was something in Russian called raznobratia. Do you know what raznobratia means in Russian? It means diversity.
Yeah.
And of course. And so what Lenin said diversity was, it was, in his own words, was diversity in form and unity in content.
Yeah.
So everybody thinks the same, even though they look different. So what you're doing is you go to Ukraine, Latvia, et cetera, and you find all the people who are communists, you elevate them, you put them in the party congress in Moscow, and they become the arbiters of how everything's going to work, and nobody who's Russian can say anything about them.
And you can't question them. If you do, you're out.
You're out. That's right.
You literally...
Yeah, because you're not doing the Soviet program now. You're pushing Great Russian Chauvinism, and one of their programs is combat Great Russian Chauvinism. So the target, so there's your diversity.
So for ordinary citizens, listen to this. How do they want to speak out? Because the way to fight this is people power, I would have thought. Yeah. People actually expressing their views. Yeah. Because for too long we've been silenced. Yeah. So I've decided, one, speak out about it. Yeah. Not many people are. That's our problem here. Yeah. People are scared to get called out.
Yeah,
what will people think of me? Fuck with it. I mean, excuse me, but stuff that.
Yeah. At some point you have to.
You have to be true to your principles.
Because the goal of that was also, by the way, called actual equality, which is what we call equity. It's not just economic, but total equality. So the way the average person has to deal with this, it's one thing to say, look, this isn't fair. Right? It's not fair. And that's just going to create more conflict. And a lot of people have noticed that. The resentment just spirals, right? Here's another thing. This program is a fraud. And if you're going to call something a fraud, you have to outline how it's a fraud. Well, this program,
fraud's a strong word. It's corruption.
It is corruption, and I think that's the key. It's not that we're opposed to diversity or that we're racist or we're sexist or whatever else. It's that the program they're using in the name of that is a fraud.
Yeah, and you tested this with your academic papers.
Yeah, of course.
And you got them through. Quickly tell me about that.
Yeah, so in 17 and 18, we wrote. My friend Peter Bogosian, who's down here recently, and I wrote 20 fake academic articles, sent them to feminist theory journals, academic journals, gender
and these are hard to
journals.
get in. This is peer review stuff.
Peer-reviewed papers, peer-reviewed journals, high-ranking peer-reviewed journals in these fields. 20 of them, they were absolutely ridiculous. What
was the first one about penis?
Oh, yeah, the very first one was about penises. It was called The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. And what we said in that paper was that penises are better not thought of as an anatomical organ, but as a social phenomenon among men that causes them to want to be domineering and
they took it.
Macho, and this causes all of our problems in the world, including climate change. Now, sort of. That one got taken by an extremely low-quality journal, which caused a controversy, which then led us to resolve the controversy by writing 20 more. Yeah. But the first of those papers that we wrote was about analyzing whether or not our society has rape culture, by, like the feminists sometimes assert, by watching dogs hump each other at the dog park and training men the way we train dogs.
You were taking the piss.
We were 100% taking the piss.
You were having them on. They took it.
They took 7 of those papers, published 4 of them. The other 3 of those 7 would have been published. It's just very slow. Sometimes it can take 10 months from when they accept it until they publish it.
It was revealed, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal got involved and found out what we were doing, and
they went after Peter.
They went after Peter. They did. They made Peter's life hell at his university. Yeah. And he eventually had to quit because his life was so miserable there. He probably told you this. It's one of his favorite stories. I know you guys talked. Peter said he went into the office, the president's office at Portland State University one time. And you know what story I'm about to tell you? Yeah. And he said, look, so I'm here with the Free Speech Union, right? So he said, look, you just got rated. He went to the president of the university. Portland State University just got rated in the top 10 worst, and it might have been the worst, free college or university for free speech in the United States. I think it was the worst. Yeah. And the president looked him in the face. He said, Peter's like, don't you care about this? You got rated as the worst in the country for free speech. And the president said, well, who made that list? Because sometimes, depending on who wrote it, you want to be on those lists. And it turns out it was an organization called FIRE, which was a foundation for individual rights in education. It's a civil rights. Yeah. It's very much like the Free Speech Union, actually. And so it's just they take up free speech issues, individual rights, anything that has to do with that, and they defend anybody if they are, whether they agree with them or disagree with them. The idea is that you should have your individual rights protected, but since they're the ones who made the list, the president of Portland State was glad that he was an anti-free speech university.
Well, he shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I agree.
That should be sacked.
Ultimately, that ultimately is going to be that's the hard truth about how this is going to get fixed. Is the people
Well, you have to get rid of them.
That's right, because
But how do
personnel
we do
is
this?
policy.
How do we do
One by one?
People are policy.
People are policy.
People create policy.
That's right.
People oversee policy, and people enforce policy.
You see, the mistake a lot of people make is they think, well, these are good-natured people, and they're trying their best, and they make some mistakes, and they don't understand it. That's true.
We know more than that now, though.
That's true for some, but on the other hand, some of them are not. Some of them are downright activists. They know exactly what they're doing, and they worked their whole life to get on that board or to get in that position or to become the president so that they can drive the organization in some direction. And you don't need very many of them if everybody else is a little bit clueless or a little bit soft.
Or scared.
And scared. You've got to find who these people are. You have to identify that they are abusing the position. They're in some position of trust in all of these.
How do we undo it? How long will it take to undo all this? Because it's quite entrenched, isn't it?
It is quite entrenched. It will take different amounts of time in different places and in different institutions. Education will take a very long time.
Education. I don't know if education can be saved.
I see it as a minimum 20-year project.
Yeah, I would have thought so, because you've got it heavily unionised. In New Zealand, it's 90% union.
Yeah.
90%.
That's
We're a country
incredible.
with no unions.
Yeah. No, and public sector unions, a lot of people don't understand this, are a complete fraud. There should be no public sector unions. Listen, this is stupid. In a private sector union, I'm not an anti-union guy, although they do tend to get syndicalist and cause other problems down the line. I'm not an anti-union guy. Why? Because the workers are incorporating themselves against the management, which holds all the cards, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I understand that.
Yeah, okay, but listen, so when the union goes in to negotiate with management and a corporation, both sides have skin in the game. The management wants to get back to work. He wants to maximize his profit. He wants to do what he can. The union is threatening to withhold his ability to do that, and they have demands. They want those demands met. But both sides have something to lose. Both sides have an incentive to reach an agreement. That's in a private sector union. In a public sector union, it's completely different. You have agents of the government going to complain to the government that they want demands, but the government has absolutely no incentives to reach deals. It only has incentives to cave in. It has absolutely no incentives.
what's the point?
Their incentive is only, and this is where it gets corrupt as hell, their incentive is only that they have to, in some sense, keep the people that they're supposed to be elected by and accountable to somewhat happy. Well, a lot of people aren't paying attention to this and whatever, but the deal is, the way that the union works it out is, well, we've got a huge membership, we've got a huge amount of sway, and we're going to make sure you get the votes if you give us what we want.
Yeah, it's corrupt.
And it's totally corrupt.
Yeah.
And the entire
Money
state of
changes hands.
California is running that way. I bet you the whole entire country of New Zealand's running that way.
It is, especially on the left side. Yeah.
And I don't know that the political will exists or will exist anytime soon, but getting rid of public sector unions in the United States is something at least I want to push for.
What does the world look like if we don't fight this and if we don't get rid of it?
We already run this experiment a handful of times, although the technology is different, circumstances are different. The short answer to your question is, look at what you see in China. That will be everywhere. Look at the totalitarian system.
So you've got a communist politics and you've got a capitalist trade.
No, you have a communist politics and you have a fascist economy. It is fascist. The corporations in China are owned by the state. They own all the raw materials, all the land, all of the heavy capital. And if you don't do what the state says and you don't meet the state's quotas and interests first, you're allowed to make all the money you want. But if you don't meet what the state says first, you're out of business.
Yeah, that's China.
So that's fascism. They do not have a capitalist model at all. They have a mixture of communism and fascism. So like I said earlier, that woke is an evolution of communism from the 1840s to the present.
So woke ends up being fascist.
It's communism and fascism like they made it. It's both at the same time.
They just don't use those words.
It's communist philosophy and fascist economics.
Yeah, well, fascism is the end result, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that's how it always works, because communism is not possible. Communism is the heaven state of a religion called communism.
Well, we've seen it doesn't work.
Yeah, well, it can't. It's a heaven state. It's the idea that we can go back to Garden of Eden. If we get literal with Karl Marx, what he says communism is, that we're going to go to the return to the tribal state of nature of human beings, which is that we live in tribes that are perfectly communistic. Nobody owns anything. Everybody shares everything, while retaining all the fruits of the industrial era.
Doesn't happen.
It can't happen.
It doesn't exist.
That's right. It does not exist.
A critical race theory, your take, the New Zealand perspective, New Zealanders are scared to call out anything that may be of a Māori if you were blaming Māori for something, because they're scared to be called racist.
Yeah, of course. No.
So people shut up and do nothing.
So in 21, I published it in 22, and in 21 I wrote a book called Race Marxism.
Yeah.
And it came out February 22. The first sentence in the book, I think there's like a foreword or a preface or something, but after that, the first sentence of the book, chapter 1, I put it up as a definition, critical race theory. And I give 3 definitions, 1, 2, 3. Critical race theory, noun, 1, calling everything you want to control racist until you control it. That's the bottom line of what it is.
Simple, isn't it?
It's very simple. And what is critical race theory? The title of the book, Race Marxism.
No one wants to be called racist.
No one wants to be called racist. It's incredibly damaging because we know it's wrong.
I think it's lazy.
In other words, here's one of those contradictions I'm saying to point out. It wouldn't work. They say, oh, it's a racist society. Them calling you racist wouldn't work if it was a racist society. You'd say, hell yeah, I am, go away. But we don't say that. We're like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, because we're not a racist.
I am not.
Yeah, we only get defensive about it because it's not true.
When people say that to me, I say it's just lazy.
It is lazy.
It's boring and lazy criticism.
That's right.
You've got to think better than that.
Yeah, that's right. And that's exactly right. And it's a weaponized term to try to catch people out, knowing that they've done things uncomfortable or been,
It's to silence them.
It is to silence them. That's exactly. And if you read about Mao Zedong's time in China, that's exactly, they called these things thought-terminating cliches. And the idea was that you just say a certain thing, like, you're a capitalist roader.
Yeah.
So now you're a racist, but then it was, you're a capitalist roader. Yeah. What does that mean? It's well, you got the socialist road and you got the capitalist road. Which road are you taking, comrade? And it's like, oh, you're one of the guys on the capitalist road.
Left and right. Yeah.
That's right. You're a reactionary. You're a revisionist. They had all these names. And once you got called one of those names, you're done. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're done.
The queer, the critical, that just back to the queer theory.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, it is. So basically, but what's their end goal?
Their end goal is to absolutely do away with norms in society completely. And why in the hell would you want to do that? Well, if you don't have any norms and you don't know how to tell when something's right or wrong any longer, the people who are the ones saying, no, everything's wrong, everything's messed up, everything has to be different, are the only ones who seem to know anything. So it's, again, they get to be the gurus. So, you have to go treat everybody this way, you have to treat everybody that way. Nothing's actually true. It's all about how you feel. Like, I can look at you, it took me absolutely no time to determine that you're a man. Like, no time at all. Then this is true.
You worked it out within a second of me arriving.
That's right. It's for 99.999% of the population that sucks for the very small. It's where you get confused, like Pat, they used to make fun of on Saturday Night Live as a joke. You're not allowed to make that joke anymore.
Yeah,
but
I worked out that you're a man too.
Yeah, it comes out to be very easy most of the time.
Yeah,
and so much so that misgendering, as it really would have been, was offensive to people.
Our opposition leader here, who's the current preferred Prime Minister, couldn't answer the question, "What's a woman?"
No, of course not.
See, my answer is my mum.
Yeah, your mom.
Well, it's a really simple answer.
It is. That's right. Adult human female is a good answer. That's one that was in the dictionary for a long time.
Yeah.
This is what their goal is to make it so, you know what, actually, you can't tell. And so your minister couldn't answer what is a woman. Why? Well, we had our Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, got asked the same question by my Senator, Marsha Blackburn, in her confirmation hearing. What is a woman? And she said, well, I'm not an expert. She said, I'm not a biologist, actually, but she said, I'm not an expert.
Come on.
So that's the point right there. If nobody can look at reality and determine reality for themselves, they have to ask an expert. And who are the experts? The queer theorists.
Queer theorists. Yep.
There you go. And now you see the whole trick. You see the whole game.
Are you hopeful that? See, in my view is it's taken 40 years to get to here.
Yeah.
40 years probably. Yep. How would it take? Would it take 40 years to get out of it?
No. It'll be faster.
You think it's crumbling?
My friend, I'm from America.
Yeah.
Let me bring
it's crumbling fast.
Yeah, let me bring you the good news from my people.
Yeah.
We're done with this.
Yes.
We are. I mean, states like California are putting up a fight. New York's putting up a fight. Some of these very strong Democrats. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, the American people are basically tired of it. We don't want to hear it anymore.
They're actually angry about it, aren't they?
That's the scary part. Is the anger about it now. Yeah, and it's like people have got to cool their heads a little bit. But we're done with it, right? And so
Because it's got you where? Absolutely nowhere.
It went I told you, we've run these experiments before. The Soviets did the Korean-Zatia program. By the end of the 1920s, they were unable to implement their new economic policy because of these exact problems.
I think it's entrenched here. I think it's entrenched here. I think we're not an outlier. We're in the game.
You are. It's more here, but I think so the United States is obviously getting rid of it the fastest. I actually, having looked around, at least in the English-speaking world, I really suspect New Zealand's the next one behind. And
not because the Prime Minister's doing anything about it.
No, not yet.
Catless.
Well, yeah, they all are.
It doesn't have to be. Look at Trump.
He
just followed the. If he stood up, I had a former MP on my program last week who said to me, the best thing this Prime Minister can do is stand up there and say, all appointments from now on are going to be based on merit.
Yeah. And if they
doesn't cost you a cent.
If they don't like Trump, and I think honestly that they should, but I get it, not everybody does, and it's different on the world stage because he's playing big games. If you don't like Trump or you're afraid it's going to play badly, here's a couple of pieces of advice for the good Prime Minister and his cabinet and whatnot. First of all, there's another guy you can watch. His name's Ron DeSantis. He's the governor of Florida. Go see what he's doing. You don't have to get nitty-gritty about it, but take a look. And then you never have to mention, I think it's probably going to be beneficial for you very quickly to start doing it. You don't have to mention that you're watching Trump or watching DeSantis. Just do what they do. Just copy them.
Yeah. And without saying so.
Without saying so. If it's going to be too inflammatory to say so, don't say so. But I've went around for like several years talking in U.S. state after state, and they say, "Well, what do we do?" And sometimes I'll have like somebody from the governor's office or the governor will be there, and I'll say, "Why don't you do what Ron DeSantis is doing?" And of course, if you say it to one of the other governors, they go, "Oh, they're mad that I didn't point out them." No, it's like, well, no, you're a coward,
you're not doing the right thing.
Not doing it. Like Ron DeSantis, and I don't think he's perfect, and I don't know that he would have been a great
What's
president.
the best thing he's done?
He stood up to this across the board. He's the best thing he did was he was the only governor that just ended all the COVID madness, and he did so. He went full lockdown like everybody else at first.
This city was locked down for 3 or 4 months,
and then he swapped it out within the fastest time. I think by June or so. I can't remember exactly when it was. Yeah. So very quickly, but he got rid of all of it, and he took a stand. And it's now everybody in the United States says the free state of Florida.
Trump is doing what Trump said he was going to do.
Yeah,
and I can't believe that there's a surprise at his program. Because he told us months ago what he was going to do. That's one of the greatest things about Trump is that he does he says what he's going to do and he does it.
Yeah,
especially this time.
What a concept! Yeah, is what he's doing. So I think a lot more leaders out there need to start to realize. And now I get it, because I work in Canada a lot. And the Canadians are a bit cooked.
Are you still talking to Canada, huh?
I try. I have a lot of very good connections in Alberta. I would love to see Alberta at least get saved. I've put a lot of effort into it, so you get invested, right? And I grew up near Canada part of my childhood, and so I've always had kind of a friendly relationship. So I'd love to see it, but they're like. You can't say, hey, we're doing what Trump did. But in other countries...
They're woke, aren't they?
Yeah, they're woke as hell.
They are the leaders.
They're the worst. They're the worst. They'll be the last ones.
They're apologising for being white.
I know. They're apologising, I think, for being Canadian at this point.
I think they're apologising for living.
Their medical assistance and dying program suggests, yes. In fact, that MAID program, the government on suicide.
It's well subscribed, is it?
I forgot the statistic, but it is a shocking number of proportion of Canadians. It's like a real percentage. It's not like 0.002.
Like here.
No, it's like a very significant. It's like
wow.
It's like 1 in 20 or 1 in 16 or something. Yeah, it's
signing up to die.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Is that how miserable they are?
That's how miserable. Yeah, it's terrible. And so
my God, maybe the whole country needs to go under.
Canada is in bad shape, so it won't work there as we're seeing play
Trudeau
out.
was a disgrace.
Totally.
But he was a fake.
He is?
He lied about himself. He didn't even believe himself, if you look at his past.
Yeah.
He was found out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And
he just said his mate.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They're big World Economic Forum buddies, too. Yeah. And Jacinda was a disaster. Unfortunately, it's like I was a little bit scared to come down here because I'm like, oh, Jacinda. But then I'm like, wait, no, they kicked her out.
And she's not, you're more welcome here than her, I think.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I don't think she can live here. I seriously think she's gone from a plus 80% approval, the last poll I saw, down to -1.
I'm sorry, she's a monster.
A monster?
Yeah. She's a monster. What she did, I think, at the behest of global entities primarily, probably on some promise that she'd be very well taken care of if she pulled it off, was try to absolutely destroy New Zealand for a global project to turn the entire world into a global China. And frankly, to hell with people who do that. Yeah, and it's time for our leaders to basically just open up and say it. You know, President Trump's, you may not agree with everything he's doing, but he's got the right attitude. He's got the right energy.
So I'll make this my last point, and you can respond to it. I was told the other day, and this guy whispered it to me in case it was heard loudly, but he says, Trump's made it okay to be white again.
Yeah, I mean, I hate playing into the identity politics thing, but
it's hard not to when it's been played against you.
That's the bait. But since I've studied the Soviets and I understand what happened after the Koreanizatsiya was the great Russification that Stalin did. So in 1930, he decided, all this ethnic strife isn't working out. Now everybody's going to be Russian, and he made it okay to be Russian again, right? And that's where he murdered 9 million Ukrainians. And so it's like, I know how that game can play out, and I just think it's very dangerous. It should just be okay to be whoever you are again. Is a much better message. It's like, remember how much trouble people got in? They said Black Lives Matter, and somebody said All Lives Matter.
That was one of the starts of it, yeah.
Yeah, so the same thing. The answer to Black Lives Matter was All Lives Matter, and you could tell because how mad it made them whenever you said
Black Lives Matter made us say, does ours matter too?
Yeah, well, exactly. But the All Lives Matter was the right answer.
Yeah.
And so right now, it's Trump made it okay to be anybody again.
Yeah.
Just
Trump made it okay to be okay again.
Yeah, just be okay. Just be who you are. Yeah. Like, why don't you just be an individual that can get along?
But you know, with this critical race theory, it becomes so unbalanced and so wide of where people are at, that you do push back on the other side.
That's the problem, and I'm seeing this in the U.S. right now. Is it's all starting to go really too far too fast. I don't think it's going there. I think it's being pushed there by bad actors.
Well, this is dangerous too, though, right?
I think and I think it's being done intentionally. And so I'm starting to hear a rising group of voices just in the past few weeks are saying, I just wanted to do some edgy memes. I wanted to make fun of it. I wanted to blow off steam, and now I realize it's connected to some really bad stuff. And now people are trying to figure out how to back up. And so what's the answer for them? It's the same answer I just said. It's individualism. Who cares what you look like? Who cares where you came from unless it's got something relevant to the story?
Identity politics will be the end of us.
Identity politics will destroy anything that it gets involved in. And this was deliberately deployed on our society. It was field tested in Mao's China.
Yeah.
He created the red and black categories of identity and all these different identity categories and pit them at war with each other and used it to regain his power in the 60s.
It's designed to blow up a modern society as we know it.
That's exactly what it's meant to do.
And to replace it.
A lot of people think it's like, oh no, it's like the civil rights movement. That was identity politics. No, it wasn't. They carried signs that said, I am a man, right? Which means my identity doesn't matter. And then this is, my identity is key to what you have to understand about me. So it's the exact opposite of the civil rights movement.
You know, I look at my son who's 14, and they are really pushing back a bit. They've identified this in the schools.
Yeah.
At this young age, and they are old school.
Yeah.
And they have just pushed back on this.
Yeah.
Which I'm quite proud of.
Yeah.
But they're young minds to be corrupted, you know?
No, that's right. And
young minds to be putting this stuff into.
That's right. And it's to have it put into your mind one way softens you up to have it pulled the other. And I think that's incredibly important because, for example,
rainbow crossings.
Oh, I know. I know.
Well, you can spend $100,000 on them here.
Yeah. And imagine
we don't have the cancer drugs, but we have the rainbow crossing.
Right. And if you hit your gas pedal a little too hard and leave a mark on one, you're in trouble. Right?
You bastard.
Yeah. And so the thing is that I just recently was involved in an online, I was actually trying to call out. I was not involved in the debate. There was a debate happening about a visa thing in the U.S. For legal immigration. And I said, this whole thing is fake, right? Yeah. And I said, this is fake. Don't get involved. This is meant to tear people apart on immigration within the Make America Great Again movement. And I got involved, and I got attacked like crazy for saying, don't get involved in this, right? This is fake. This is meant to screw us up. And some guys I know did this investigation into it, and they were like, do you know that you're getting attacked by a Russian disinformation network? Which means there are foreign entities that are very eager to lead our people, our young people in particular, who are more susceptible to the messaging, we're very eager to lead them into radicalism that benefits some country that's not ours.
Yeah, see, they can get them easy through social media.
Yeah.
All the kids are accessible now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what percentage of the activity on social media do people think is real? I mean, most people think when they go on there that, this thing got 3,000 likes, it's important, or 10,000
most of it's
likes.
not real.
It's,
I tell my son this every week. By the end of the week, if you had 30 hours, most of 29 and a half is crap.
That's right. I just saw a thing that said at least 2/3 of the accounts on social media are bots. They're not even real accounts.
Yeah, there we go.
If you put up something edgy about whatever subject, maybe it's a little bit racist, maybe it's a little bit whatever, and they want to radicalize you, they can come in with the bot networks and give you 5,000 likes. But they're all fake likes. It wasn't 5,000 people. It was one bot network that decided they wanted to blow you up.
Wow.
And now your psychology is all like, wow, that's what people resonate with. They can screw up your head. They can do it the other way. They can have the bot networks come in and you put something, like, hey, I think we should treat people like individuals. Don't do that. And then they bombard you with calling you names and saying you're stupid and we tried that and it failed and all this. And again, you didn't make 1,000 people mad who came and yelled at you and ruined your day for 3 days straight on social media. What you did was you triggered a bot network where a bunch of bot accounts, not even real accounts, run by ChatGPT and stuff, came and put a bunch of stuff on you to screw with your head.
The other day I wrote an article for the newspaper, and I talked about the Māori population here being replaced by the size of the Asian migrant population, because it's about to be passed.
Yeah.
Māori used to be the biggest group as the founders of New Zealand, and now it's Pākehā, and now they were second. Now it's about to be third because of immigration into New Zealand.
Uh-huh.
The publisher took out the word Asia and just said immigrant.
Huh.
Now we collect the stats as Māori, Asia, Pākehā, New Zealanders.
Yeah.
But the publisher wouldn't let me use the terms.
Amazing. Yeah,
that's bullshit.
Yeah, it reminds me of a case. So in Virginia, the state legislature a couple of years ago tried to pass a resolution mandating education about communism, its history, and its philosophy in public schools in order to fight communism. So not like pro-communist indoctrination, but a full account of what communism really is. And obviously the communists don't want communism to be taught about truthfully. So the Democrats all voted against it, and the Republicans in the legislature all voted for it. So it turns out there was 2 more Democrats or something like that. So it lost. But the media came out and said we can't have education about the history of communism in Virginia schools because it would encourage anti-Asian discrimination because of how bad Mao was. And so, yeah, it's the same. You can see what the excuses are. But again, what do we do about it? You point out that this is a deliberate attempt to use identity in order to force an ideological program.
But see, I would be okay with it if they left me alone. See, I don't mind how you live your life.
Yeah.
Go and live your life. I don't care if you want to identify as a cat, identify as a dog, and run with the angels and believe what you like. Just don't come into my world.
Yeah.
So I don't want you to into my
make me
world, and
affirm it.
I'm not coming near yours. But it's not like that, is it?
No, it's not. And that's
It's way more aggressive and brutal.
Right. And well, again, this is how communism works. Communism
Stop
is
hands off.
the fundamental belief of communism is that the communist heaven, the communist utopia, communism itself will arrive when everybody believes it correctly. So when it's not arriving, it must mean people don't believe it right. So they can't leave you alone. With transgender, for example, the idea isn't that somebody, has dysphoria. This is a very common misconception. People think, well, you have this poor person, a young person, and they're, traumatized or whatever it is, and they don't know how to feel comfortable in their bodies. And so if they feel like if they could just live as the other sex, they would feel better. And so why would we be so callous and not compassionate and not give them that, lose the empathy? But the fact is, that's not how it works. The fact is, with transgender, what makes somebody transgender isn't whether or not you underwent a surgery or took a pill or took an injection or did the social thing or the binder. It's that other people tell you you're transgender. It's that other people tell you trans women are women, which is a lie. In other words, the whole thing is based off of you're really trans when you're a man who became a woman.
Yeah.
When everybody tells you that's true.
Yeah.
So you can't be left alone with that.
No, but you're not a woman.
It's not meant to be.
You're just not.
Because they believe
you shouldn't compete against women's sports.
They believe it's socially constructed. So that means they have to force the entire social environment to affirm the thing that they say. So it's unlike the old transsexual thing. So some guys were transsexuals and some women were transsexuals. most of them worked as hard as they could to pass, not because they wanted, it was like because they wanted to blend in. They wanted to live their lives. They didn't want it to be an issue. If they had to go to the toilet, they didn't want to stand out. They didn't want to look like some ogre who hasn't even shaved 3 days of beard off.
They went under the radar.
They wanted to be under the radar, right? They didn't want to involve everybody else. That's transsexualism, and you can think about it what you want, but I'm with you. If you need to do this to live your life, like I think doctors should probably be involved in finding possible other options, but fine. It's your business,
it's your
right?
life. This is your body.
But if you're going to start demanding that other people
or society changes,
society itself changes to affirm your belief about yourself, you're doing something fundamentally different.
But we're talking about such a small section of society. Overwhelmingly, the big society must change towards this complete minority.
Right, and it's not a...
We have 2 operations a year in New Zealand.
It's not an ask to accept somebody who's dealing with something. It is an ask to affirm the worldview that says that you can change sex, which you cannot do. That is a different
It's not
ask.
how it works.
That's correct. It's not how it works. So you're demanding that the entire society lie, which is a completely different program.
You're demanding to go up against people in sport who weren't born men, who don't have muscle memory like this.
Yeah, or whose bone structure,
they're men.
Yeah, look at the size of our hands. Look at the size of our shoulders.
I've actually got small hands.
If you look at, well, you could be president. If you look though, there's these graphs like how tall are men and women, and you get the bell curve, right? And they overlap a lot. There are a lot of women who not proportionally, but there are many women who are 6 feet tall. There are many more men who are 6 feet tall. But you have some men who are 5'5", and you have many more women. Yeah. Well, if you go out to hand strength, punching strength, upper body strength, the two curves barely overlap at all. They're two complete.
I've looked at this.
And if you go into the biology of hormones, like if you look at the testosterone level, right, of men and women, and measured in nanograms per deciliter or whatever, they are so distinct. Yeah. I mean, there's a tiny amount of overlap because of health problems, and that's the only reason. They are completely distinct. There is no comparison. The average woman has like 25 or 22 or something nanograms per deciliter testosterone.
Men are physically superior.
Men are they are physically superior to tasks that require upper body strength and so on. Yes.
Well, and speed.
The
fastest woman in the world is the 18th fastest person in the world.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
there's 18,000 men faster on planet Earth than the fastest woman.
Yeah, you've seen these things where every year, I think, they have I forget which country, if it's Germany or whatever, they have the boys, 15-year-old, whichever high school team wins the national play against the Olympic team on the women, and the boys almost always win.
The biggest secret that was kept here for years and years, I'll make this last point because we've almost spoken for an hour, is that the New Zealand Women's World Championship netball team, okay, it's a sport here, we're world champions.
Yeah.
But in private, they played against the New Zealand men's team, which was just a casual men's team. They weren't well known for anything. The men always won.
Oh, always. No,
but it was never talked about. We found out years later. This was 3 or 4 times a year they'd play behind closed doors to practice. Men were taller, bigger, faster, more physical.
Yeah. Oh, there's this famous story in tennis, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but he, one of the great tennis players, is stupid to have brought it up without being able to think of who it was. But he's like smoking cigarettes, while he's like
Agassi.
Might have been. And he wins. He wins this match against...
By pissing around.
Yeah, while pissing around. He comes in hungover, had drunk the night before. I think he's drinking beers and smoking cigarettes while he's playing the match. And he still wins with the world's best tennis player on the women's side. It's just a fact. It might have been McEnroe, actually. It is just...
Sounds like it will.
It is just a fact that in athletic endeavors that require most of, strength and so on... Men are, as you said, physically superior to women. They're not going to be able to compete, and so it's beyond. I mean, it's beyond asinine. It's criminal, as a matter of fact, to stick failing boys who are failing in sports. They're number 400 and whatever in their sport, and then they're number 1 in the women's by unbelievable amounts.
They're not even 400.
Yeah,
they're not. They don't rate.
My friend Riley Gaines says that they're mediocre.
Yeah, they're on the sideline
at best. Yeah,
and then suddenly they're world champions.
Yeah.
My final request of you is: how do people fight this?
Well, you've got to have the courage to tell the truth, and you've got to realize that if you're not telling the truth, nobody's telling the truth. It really starts with you. A lot of people, like I said, look for the contradictions. You're going to have to get your feet under you. You have to learn a little bit about think about these things. When you see something wrong, it's not enough to say it's not fair. You've got to figure out how it's not fair, how it works, and what it's bringing out.
So think critically. Read.
Read
your books.
You need to read a lot. I put out materials to help people understand this. Podcasts.
Yeah.
I
really
put out
helpful
mostly,
with those podcasts.
Yeah, that's the main thing. But there's books, there's articles. Mostly it's podcasts, public talks. You've got to get your head around this. You've got to open your mouth. I tell people a lot of times. I did a podcast about this too. People say, "Well, I'm too small." I just heard it this morning. I did a little event for breakfast, and this lady comes up with her husband and says, "Well, we're not important. We're just regular, everyday, retired people, and but we just wanted to say hi and all this." And it's like, no, you don't understand. There's this scene. I know it's a dorky thing to end on, but it's so important for people to hear in the Lord of the Rings. So we're in the Lord of the Rings country right now, and so. They get the forest, and the little hobbits go to the forest, and the tree people go destroy the thing. We don't have to get into the nerdy stuff. But what happens is the wizard, Gandalf, says, "I think the coming of those two small hobbits to Fangorn Forest was like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche." And a lot of people think I'm too small to make a difference. You don't know what difference you're going to make. Let me tell you a story.
So this is how Hitler started.
It's how everything starts.
Hitler started with street corner meetings and libraries.
You, too, can be the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche. So here's the story. I have a friend named Seth Dillon. He owns a company called the Babylon Bee, which is a satire site, a Christian satire site that does political satire as well. And it is the number one satire site in the world right now, but it's probably the funniest one that's ever existed. And a couple of years ago, we had this Richard Levine going by Rachel Levine as promoted to admiral and stuck in the Biden administration high up. This transgender Admiral Levine, right? So Richard Levine is this person's name, and so he was awarded Woman of the Year by Time magazine or whatever. And so the Babylon Bee thought it would be funny. So somebody, this is the small stone. Somebody at the Babylon Bee thought it would be a funny joke to say that he's Babylon Bee's Man of the Year. And they put that out, knowing they were going to get in trouble for it. They got kicked off of Twitter for it. They got banned. And one thing led to another. That is the event. That decision to write that joke.
Satirical.
That decision to write that joke was the event that led to Elon Musk buying Twitter.
Wow.
And then Elon Musk getting behind Trump.
Wow.
And then literally the changing of the world. So if you think you're too small, you have a guy in a writing room in a comedy outfit for the internet writing a joke.
It's called humor. It's called satire.
He thought he was writing a joke that would bounce around for 3 or 4 days and everybody'd forget about it. Ha ha ha. Some likes and clicks on the internet. And it literally changed the world. Literally changed the world. So don't tell me you're too small. Learn the truth. Start telling the truth. If you're telling the truth over coffee or tea with your friend, good. If you're telling the truth, by standing up at a meeting and for the government and saying what you think, good. If you start a show or if you write or whatever, good. But find a venue where you can tell the truth. If you're not telling the truth to your kids, you're failing. You need to be telling your kids the truth.
Be brave, be courageous. That's just truth-telling.
That's right, 100%.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah,
all the best, man. Cheers.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.